Hello, this is me, your friend Betul, in another podcast again. I'm gonna talk about an interesting topic that has to do with translation. The first question about it is why did different cultures use translation? Well, before answering this question, let's look at the origin of translation, and it all goes back to transferring activity, implicit or explicit, from Greek to into Roman. In other words, we can say that practically the first people to carry out the translation technique were the Romans, although it was not an easy task because they have to provide a meaning sense from a foreign language to the native language. Now, once I have given a brief introduction about the backgrounds of this word, I would like to move on to answering the question. Based on the latter, it's clear that cultures use translation for the main purpose of communication. In other words, it has been used to understand the messages that were said in other languages. Now, let's move on to another question that has to do with all this, and it's the following. Have you used translation while teaching a second language? And my answer is yes, I have. From my teaching perspective, translation is very important, especially at basic levels. That is, when the learner is completely at zero. However, it is also very important to say that we should not abuse this technique, but that it should be used when we don't know the word. Of course, a communicative approach will always be better in order for the learner to develop naturally in a foreign language environment. Speaking about this, there are certain teaching strategies such as comprehensible input to avoid the learner to translate what he sees or reads all the time. That is, once he knows the meaning of strange words, the teacher may get the learner to understand the message said by him. As I told previously, we shouldn't use the translation all the time. The students must understand the message through the context. In other words, context plays an important role in order to acquire a second language. Now, let's move on to the last question, and this is about whether translation works in the teaching of a second language. And I must point out that translation should not be seen as a technique but a resource, something that is left in the last instance when it is not understood a word. As I told previously, as teachers, we should encourage a communicative environment inside the classroom because of its most important acquiring and learning. Let's remember that the first item requires an unconsciously process that the student doesn't find difficult. In fact, some experts on this matter suggest that a second language mustn't be studied but practiced in a natural approach. Based on all of the above, we might say that translation by itself does not work, since it would be very tedious to go translating word by word when we had to read statements, when it's better to use a communicative and natural approach to achieve the teaching purposes. To end up this topic, we were able to analyze different opinions of authors such as Mario Brandruska, who claimed that both in theory and as in practice, it is impossible to translate completely a text from one language to another, or that of Bloomfield, who was of the opinion that only scientific tests could be translated as the meanings of language do not agree with the scientific classification. The true thing is that translation has played an important role throughout the years in order to better understand the messages that foreigner people have sent, and in my teaching view it should be seen as a resource that we can use when we don't know what the meaning of a certain words. No further ado, thanks for listening to this podcast. Bye bye.